Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion today, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience of SmithWeekly, including Brian H., Jeff S., Matt S., Sean M., and Joe G. On the program today, we've got two guests joining us. Mr. Greg Hall, CEO and Managing Director, is back with us, and first time on the program is Dr. Andrea Marsland-Smith, Chief Operating Officer, representing Alligator Energy, an Australian-focused uranium project developer with its Samphire uranium project in South Australia, which is in its trial production stages. Alligator Energy also has exploration projects at Big Lake, South Australia, and also Northern Territories with its Alligator River Uranium Province exploration grounds. The company is listed on the Australian Securities Exchange under the symbol AGE, as well as on the US OTC markets under the symbol ALGEF. Greg and Andrea, it's great to have you on the program. Welcome.
Thank you, Andrew. Nice to talk to you and meet you again.
Yeah, and thank you, Andrew. First time meeting. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Great to have you on. Well, I want to get to the market in a moment, get your thoughts. But Andrea, you are new to the program and you probably are new to much of our audience. Why don't we have you give us your background and experience in the natural resource sector as well as in the uranium segment?
Sure. My early career started off in gold exploration in Western Australia, but then shortly transferred to the uranium industry starting in 2000, working with Heathgate Resources, a subsidiary of General Atomics there in the US, on the Beverley uranium mine. So I was the company's first exploration geologist in the tenements that they held in the Frome Basin in South Australia. And through that tenure, discovered the 4 Mile uranium deposit in 2005. So since that time, I left shortly after that discovery to work for companies such as Orano, Sinosteel Uranium, but then went back to Heathgate to permit 4 Mile through to production. So I left Heathgate in 2020 to join Alligator thereafter, and I've been working here on the Samphire deposit for the last 3 years to get that up and running, and hopefully the next uranium mine here in South Australia.
You know, it's really good to point this out because definitely this is your backyard here, essentially, where you are in South Australia, and the expertise both on the exploration front, but then also dealing with the very difficult and complex permitting, especially in a jurisdiction such as Australia, and the challenges that come with that. And so the experience is much welcome, and I'm sure Greg's very happy to have you on board and adding the experience and operational expertise that you have. I'd like to talk a little bit about the uranium market just briefly, and I'd like to have Greg take over for a moment and give some of his thoughts on where the uranium market is today and to start 2025. We're 3 months in. Greg, any comments on the recent market events that you've seen out there? And then, of course, the question that a lot of investors out there probably think about is sentiment for the uranium juniors and, of course, development stage companies in the uranium sector.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. The uranium market has obviously, when it took off in late 2020, it really took off on the political impetus for nuclear being back in favour as a clean energy source, supporting renewables. A real demand, you could see the supply demand coming, and then soon after that you had the spot market buying by the funds, which took the short-term supply out of the market, and that really drove that short-term price up. Now, as most of your listeners will know, ever since the uranium business has been around from the 60s onwards, pretty well all uranium, 80% at least, has been sold under long-term contract directly between producer and utility. It's been very rare that the spot market has played a big game in the production sales, but it is a lead indicator of the incentive money coming back into the market, and that's what's occurred in the last 4 years. But the long-term market is what we focus on at the stage we're at, and what we're seeing is that the price has moved up around that $80 mark. It's stayed around that mark. With a softer spot price, you might see it reset a little, but we can't see it going much down below 75 because you need to have incentive for new projects to start. In fact, I think the long-term price will stay strong and keep going longer. You're seeing the spot now starting to behave like a clearing market. There is a little bit of excess supply coming in from some producers, from some traders. Not a lot of buying. The utilities generally, especially in the US, who traditionally buy spot, they are pretty well covered up to 28, 29. And so there's not a lot of independent buying. You're starting to see enough of a gap between the long term and the spot, whereby some of those utilities that have a bit of extra cash in their buying kitty might do a buy and hold strategy. They'll say, we can buy a few £100,000 of uranium now, hold it for 3 years until we need it, and it's worth holding it because of the interest rate compared to the long-term price. So there'll be a little bit of buy and hold going on, but mostly you're seeing that if as material comes into the spot market, it doesn't get snapped up like it did before. And certainly with the spot market and the share prices of the funds, they don't have the NAV to be able to raise cash and purchase additional spot at the current time. So the spot is now behaving like a clearing market, which is generally most of the time how it behaves. So from our perspective, we're not worried about that too much. It does mean that investors, especially shorter term investors, will come out of the market and go somewhere else where they see shorter term gains higher. But the longer term investors know the supply demand fundamentals are good. Now, we certainly are hearing that from the nuclear utilities. We've met with pretty well every nuclear utility in the US, in Europe, some starting to in Japan and Korea. We've met with many of them twice. We're meeting with utilities in Europe in particular who we've never met with before. In fact, in my experience when I was marketing for Rio Tinto, you often didn't meet with them all. Now, all of them want to understand where does future uranium supply come from within Australia? Because Australia is a tier one producer, the same as essentially the States, Canada, Australia, Namibia. They are prime. Kazakhstan's still an important producer, but we all know the geopolitics are starting to swing there between China and Russia. Niger was almost classed as a tier one, but now it's not. So all of these utilities, sometimes I have 2-hour sessions just talking about the uranium projects around Australia that myself and Andrea have a broad understanding of. So definitely the utilities are trying to find out what mines will be working, what mines will be established and starting up from 2029-30 onwards. And we're definitely seeing that interest. So we're excited for the future. We think the long-term demand will be there, the long-term price will be there, and that sets us and supports our path with our Samphire project.
And Andrea, any thoughts to add to what Greg said there, and also just your overall thoughts on how you see the industry today as far as the appetite for nuclear energy, just how you're looking at this, because you've obviously been around here for quite a while too, and you must have an opinion.
My early career in the uranium industry wasn't, looked on very well by others in the market, really. The uranium price was, when I started, was $7 a pound, and so I've been through a number of probably 2 cycles of boom and bust in my career. The difference between this upswing is definitely the change in conversation around decarbonisation, the recognition that nuclear power being a support to renewables, part of the energy mix. So fundamentally that's changed the supply-demand equation. So it's different than pre-Fukushima times, this run-up, I think. And so, like Greg said, great fundamentals in terms of the long-term price and opportunities for companies like us that have got a project to steadily work on getting the project into production in the future.
I do think that is absolutely where we are. And back to what Greg said on the spread and term and spot prices, this is an excellent opportunity for some market participants out there, carry traders and so forth, a number of things that can be had here, and certainly small quantity, which confirms everything that we had expected as well. Everything's functioning fine, and it's good to have these corrective phases. It's good to have these breaks. And I guess I can say that from a little bit more of a comfortable position of some liquidity. And obviously, we've all been taught patience in this market. Like anybody who's been in this market for 5 years plus can understand patience, and certainly us that are well beyond 10 years. And both you and Greg, Andrea, have a lot of experience in watching the ups and downs of this market as well. But I think we're in a really good position here. We have some things to be sorted out on the politic front, jurisdictional complications, which have changed the market quite a bit, huge challenges on restarts, huge challenges on new builds, pick your jurisdiction. There's a lot of complications here, and those things are going to add up as we get into the next couple of years here, and it's going to continue to propel hopefully good projects and good operators who can actually build these and actually operate them. Those are going to be rewarded the most. Yes. So, well, why don't we move on here and get into company news. First, the company has had another important milestone where it has submitted the final operating plan for the field recovery trial startup to the respective agencies, 3 of them. Talk about that submission. This is for Samphire, of course. And Greg, why don't you start with that? Talk about that submission, when we can expect approval, and then when you would see startup of the trial commencing. Or Andrea, feel free to take that one.
Yeah, I'll kick off and pass to Andrea. We went through a process with those 3 departments over the last 2 years, in fact, to get what's called a retention lease. Now, this is a halfway lease, if you like, between an exploration lease, which only allows you to explore, and a mining lease, which allows you to produce and to sell. A retention lease allows you to retain a lease while you undertake test work. It can allow the departments to do a greater level of monitoring. It doesn't allow us to sell the product from there, but it allows us to do the pilot testing, essentially. Because we're a relatively new area, there hasn't been uranium, in situ uranium, or even any sort of uranium mined in this region around Whyalla in South Australia. There was a lot of focus on the hydrogeology, the groundwater. It is hypersaline water we have there, so it can behave and work well with uranium leaching, and actually has very good qualities that allow it to naturally attenuate back to its original state. But the agencies and hydrogeologists in the government that are concerned have to verify that is the case. And so that took some time. Andrea and her very experienced team of hydrogeologists and approvals people took them through that, and eventually got the retention lease. And now the Program for Environment Protection or Rehab, we call it a PEPA, which is the operating plan, has been submitted taking into account the conditions from that lease. Now, I'll mention that, look, as I said in the release, or as we both said in the release we put out, it will take some months to approve. Andrea and her team tried to preempt a lot of potential questions by meeting with the departments involved, and we hope that's going to help that process. But they can request additional information which can delay the approval of the plan. So we're hopeful to get it within months, and that will take us towards the middle of the year for construction of the pilot plant. We have the prefabricated containerised pilot plant already in our yard in Whyalla. It's been there since last year. We have all the aspects that we need to commence, including reagents, including resins. And we have a full team of very highly experienced people led by Andrea, all production ISR experienced, ready to take on the challenge. I will point out, as Andrea said with her experience, she did lead the team that discovered 4 Mile, but she did a lot more than that. She brought that into production as head of wellfields, and then eventually took over as full operations manager for some years at Beverley 4 Mile Complex. And then her final role there was looking after everything around the production operations, that is government, Indigenous, markets, sales, all of those things. So Andrea has got the full bottle of how you discover, develop, bring to production, operate ISR plants and wellfields, and deal with all the stakeholders that go around it. So I wanted to emphasise to your listeners that was the reason that we recruited Andrea into this role, and she's now put in place a good 6-person management team under her, everything from principal geologists through to stakeholder engagement, who also have that experience. So we're very pleased to be able to take that team to lead Samphire forward. So why don't you talk about the program with Samphire this year?
Last year we, of course, have been drilling to increase the integrity of the resource, and then, as Greg said, planning for the field recovery trial and thick into approvals. Andrew, I might talk a little bit about what the field recovery trial is about, particularly around the key parameters that we want to test. So the field recovery trial itself, like Greg said, will be constructed Q3, Q4 this year. The plant itself is containerised, it's very mobile, so we can easily get that on ground, probably construct that within about 2 months, so it's a quick construction time, and then we get into commissioning and operation. So the whole reason for the trial, and it's a prudent step before you start planning a full mine, is to do a test like this, and we're installing 3 well rings, 3 wells in different parts of the deposit, so that we could get an understanding of how different areas of the deposit at Samphire leach. We'll be testing those 3 areas 1 month at a time. So the plan for the trial is really 3-month short trial. We want to test fast, understand fast, and then keep moving. So we've pulled our wells in very close to each other such that we can gain that information quicker than a normal wellfield pattern, which would be spaced wider, where you'd get your leaching parameters over, say, a 12-month period. We are trying to reduce that time period to 1 month so we can get the key parameters that we need for a feasibility study input. So the 3 key things that we're testing for the field recovery trial is the recovery of the uranium from the ground or from the wells themselves, which informs future wellfield design for the full-scale plant. Important to understand capital costs that go into the feasibility study, and also the number of wells that's needed for production requirements in a future mine. We're also going to test uranium extraction from the lixiviant, which is the fluid that comes out of the wellfield and goes into the plant, and how well that uranium is extracted from the lixiviant onto the ion exchange resins in ion exchange columns in the plant. We're also testing a new resin that is salt tolerant, because we have very saline groundwater that we're dealing with. So these resins come from Germany, and it's the top of the range resin, and so we're testing the performance of that because we have chosen that resin particularly to use in the final mine plan as we work through, the research and the planning of that. We also need to examine the optimum chemistry for extracting that uranium, so there's a number of tests that we'll be doing in that space. And again, all of these things input into the plant design for an eventual full-scale mine. The other thing the last thing is we're testing is uranium stripping from the resin itself, which is the back end of the process, again, to optimise the chemistry. We're testing 40 different combinations of chemistry there, so there's a lot of work being done to really optimise for the full-scale mine. So there's a lot going on in a 3-month period, but we have a great team. We've been preparing for this. We've got all the operational plans in place. We understand what we're doing. It's now we're really ready to get on with it and undertake the trial.
Just to finalise that, Andrew, we'll construct in the middle of the year. We'll operate from Q3 to Q4, as Andrea said. We can extend the operation if we need. If we need to run the well fields a little longer, we can. There's no time constraints on us. But we want to try to make sure that we have the engineering team for the feasibility study selected through expressive interest and in place by the 3rd, 4th quarter, so they can see the tail end operation of this plant and lead straight into feasibility study, which will go then in the latter part of 25 and into 26. So that's important to achieve. So essentially, it puts us in the realm of where you've seen other projects. Denison did their trial 2 years ago. Boss Energy were in this sort of situation in 2019, where they just completed their trial and were going into feasibility. So from our perspective, we're very pleased to be able to finally get the runs on the board and do it this year.
Greg, that's great. I appreciate that. Andrea, very good information here. All the difficult areas are going to be tested during this FRT. Obviously, once you guys are able to strip the uranium off of the resin, I think it's a fairly straightforward finishing process after that that's not too complicated. I certainly would agree that if you guys can take the extra time needed to refine everything. What's interesting about this project is the references that Greg mentioned is some of these other ones are doing it in a deposit that's has different conditions, different characteristics, whereas this one, and maybe Andrew, you can talk about this for just a moment. I had a follow-up question here for you. The deposit at 4 Mile, for example, Maybe you can compare and contrast just briefly a little bit as to maybe some of the things you would expect coming out of this trial in terms of just overall expectation for the results. I know obviously this is speculative and you may not be able to answer this, but what do you see as far as results there? And then also you speak just a little bit to your expertise in giving feedback in the engineering process for the feasibility in terms of your actual field experience and your expertise when giving feedback to the engineers surrounding the design based on obviously this FRT.
Well, let's start with the first question. Compare and contrast 4 Mile to Samphire. So they are two totally different deposits, even though their similarities lie in being hosted in sands or sandstones. 4 Mile is one of the biggest in situ recovery, or is the biggest in situ recovery deposit in Australia, if not the world, comparing to Kazakhstan. It's in groundwater that is not as salty as Samphire. So Samphire has hypersaline groundwater where the uranium sits. So the key difference here is the chlorides in the water. So what the chlorides do is sometimes interfere with the loading of the resin in the plant because chloride likes to attach to the resin in exchange columns rather than the uranium. So for us, the key test is to make sure that we can optimise that process, and how we're going to do that is using a reverse osmosis plant to reduce the chloride level in the groundwater. So Honeymoon do that in their process, but they use RO to reduce the calcium in their groundwater, not the chlorides. But they are successfully doing that. So we've just focusing on the chlorides. We don't have a calcium issue. And so that's key for us to understand what level of salinity we need to reduce the groundwater by, such that the resin loading is optimised. The resin loading is key because it informs operationally how many cycles of loading and stripping that you need to do, which also then informs the size of the columns that you need to install into the plant. You know, small bits of information like this have a big on-flow effect in how the plant's designed. The other thing I want to talk about is recovery from the wells. Worldwide, ISR projects in their well fields, on average, recover about 70% from the ground. That being said, each well that goes on has a different recovery, and in my experience, I've seen recoveries from 10% to 200%. But when you plot 1,000 of them together, you'll get, on average, 70%. So we know we're going to see a range in the field recovery trial, but it's about how the recovery curve starts plotting and how well it peaks and how fast it drops. So that's what we'll be looking at, because if it's a quick peak and a quick drop, it means that you will need to put on more wells in your well field to keep that production up. But if the recovery curve starts to decline quite smoothly at a gentle gradient, that means you need to put in less wells for your mine plan. So again, small key piece of information drives the capital costs of the project significantly.
Andrea, thank you for that. And I just wanted to ask you just a little bit about the engineering side. And I think one of the challenges, at least in some of the industries outside of uranium that I'm working in or know about in the past, is some of the expertise levels with respect to engineer experience in very technical, specialty niche areas, which is certainly ISR uranium, and just some of that decline, given the industry's been heavily challenged for quite a while. Some of that decline in that expertise and that experience, I think we've witnessed some of that. But also, some of the things you said there are super important to the success of these projects. And so I really appreciate you going into some detail here and talking about some of these key features on how it all gets put together, because if there's one thing that's missed, it can screw up the entire process, right? And so very good information here. But go ahead if you'd like, comment on the engineering, and then we'll move on.
Look, I think it's very important that you have a good team internally that have done ISR before or been operating the plant, operating a well field before, because ISR, well, it's not complex. The plant's not complex, it's pipes and pumps. So engineering-wise, it's not that hard. But what is key is that the plant is designed such that there's no spills, the right materials, And that only comes from experience because we use high pH fluids which corrode. So, if you get an engineering firm off the floor, that experience isn't there. So you'll end up with corroding pipes and pumps, basically. What is also very important is that internal knowledge that drives the design, such that the engineering firms don't over-engineer and you're not over-capitalising in your CapEx spend for the plant build. So that's very important. We even experienced that in our field recovery trial plant. We had to rely on engineers because I don't have mechanical engineers on the team. And so we had to get very involved in the making of that plant to make sure it's fit for purpose and operationally safe and gives the results that we need.
Very good comments there. And again, I think it speaks to your experience right there as well, Andrea. So I really appreciate you going to some of those things. And then you struck a note with me with respect to over-engineering. We won't get into that one too much here, but definitely sometimes, let me just use the automotive industry as the project works based on a Toyota Land Cruiser, for example. Which you can relate to there in Australia. We don't need a Bentley delivered. So it makes a lot of sense there. So I appreciate the comments. Greg, I want to bring it over to you and get any comments based on what we just talked about, but also the project is moving forward from scoping study right to feasibility study. And there will be a definitive move to final permitting, contract negotiations, financing, and ultimately construction in the coming years. Talk just a little bit about the timing to see that feasibility study, hopefully in 2026, as well as continued exploration work, infill to increase resources, and of course, improve deposit confidence.
Yeah, sure. I'll cover the first part and then hand to Andrea to talk about the expanded resource. In terms of the steps from us, we did two scoping studies, one in March 23, one in December 23. In December 23, with a larger resource, allowed us to go to £1.2 million per year in our scoping study. We did most of that study to almost a pre-feasibility level. It's just some of the factorisation of the estimated capital cost of pipe work and electrics and things. We just use standard factors, and that makes it a scoping level, if you like. So we're comfortable with the integrity in that. In general, the resource size at Blackbush, just sub £20 million, means that we can run £1.2 million a year for 12 years or a bit more. And the study work we're doing, it depends on the amount of indicated resource we have, which is around 75% of the schedule. So we have a fairly defined. We're not going to go out there and do a pre-feasibility that looks at 1 million, 1.5, 2 million, 2.5. Our resource is not large enough to do that as of yet. But what we certainly can do in the feasibility is focus on the planned size of 1.2, maybe up to 1.4, depending on the resource work we're doing now, and take that forward as our definitive study. And we can do what ifs. So you can say, if we find the extended resource that we plan to find, and we already have a satellite deposit, which Andrew will talk about, then how do we modulise the plant under the feasibility, make sure we've got the room next to existing IX columns to expand that? And then what size do we have to get to when you have to redo a different plant? So, for example, you can go from £1.2 million per annum up to £2 million per annum by modularising a plant. But if you want to jump to 2.5 to 3 with certain discoveries, then you're probably reshaping the plant with larger IX columns for efficiency, etc., rather than just duplicating small ones. So the feasibility will cover those what-ifs, but the main focus is a definitive study around that 1.2 to 1.4 million pound per year range to get detailed costs ready for a financing decision. But very importantly, the first part of the feasibility is the detailed plant design. That has to feed into the approval documents. Wellfields, you get a mining lease which will cover all the wellfield areas. The departments know you might start with this wellfield, but then you might start here. You might change the wellfields a little bit. That's fine. But the detailed plant design, you really can't change. Once you define that and you put that in the approval documents, that's what you stay with to build into the approval. So our estimated timeline, and when you're involving approvals, it can be variable. If there's additional requests, the extended time can be there. But we would see commencing feasibility late this year into 26 with the detailed designs, submitting approval documentations in early 26, That's at least a 2 to 2.5 year approval process in South Australia is our best estimate. South Australia has approved 5 uranium mines, including Olympic Dam, so the other 4 were all ISR, and they are all operating. So there's an experience base here, but the last one was approved 11 years ago. Now, the politics hasn't changed. South Australia and the federal government will approve uranium mines. But you've had turnover in the departments, different skill sets there. So we know that we'll take a good amount of work to get through that approval, but as it should. Those departments are there and are accountable to the public in South Australia to make sure that a mine can operate safely and environmentally without impacting things. So we've got to go through that process. So if you add up all of that timeline, the engineering, the approvals, then an FID decision getting into production, we could have first commissioning production in late 29, and that's the sort of time frame that we're roughly working to at the current time. And Andrew, do you want to talk about the expandability of the resource?
Yeah. The beauty about ISR resources in my career, I've seen the expansion of Beverley through to incremental expansions from the margins of the wellfields outward into North Beverley, and then again 4 Mile as you work outwards from the edges of the resource, because these deposits are often very layered. They're roll fronts, and so the roll fronts are sinuous, and then it's not like a gold deposit where you get a fault and some fluids coming in depositing some metals. These roll fronts are like waves of groundwater going through sand. So as long as there's groundwater carrying uranium will deposit in the right spot. So these deposits are typically, once you start understanding the roll front shapes and where they're going, you can follow them, and which then that brings in your future pounds for your well fields. So in Blackbush, we see exactly that. We have started to step out and understand that the roll fronts are continuous. And in that respect, we've only really tapped 10% of the area that is prospective for roll front uranium mineralisation. We've only really explored 10% of that. So we've got another 70 kilometres of channels that contain the right mix of ingredients to produce roll fronts, 70 kilometres of channels yet to explore. We know that that channel system is mineralised because there's a little satellite deposit about 5 kilometres south of Blackbush called Plumbush, and it has currently has 400 to 600 metre space drill holes in it with some very good grades intersected in great sands. So we know that's our first area that we are going to go now and start to investigate. And between Plumbush and Blackbush, as I said, there's 5 kilometres. So our next focus will be closing down that space between the southern margins of Blackbush and Plumbush. So I expect that we will see resource growth in that area as we get into some drilling in that area this year, hopefully, later this year.
Andrea, thank you for that. And yeah, I think it makes sense here to, obviously, as you guys go through this pathway in the coming years, to continue to expand and do some exploration drilling out there on the grounds. You do have quite a bit of grounds there, and you have a lot of untested grounds, as you mentioned there as well. So looking forward to seeing this continue to expand as of course, capital allows and time allows and the market allows to continue to add the pounds here. And I think that there's a lot of upside yet on the exploration grounds there at Samphire. Andrea, just any other comments on Samphire before we move on? I want to talk about Big Lake for a moment, but just any other key items you want to cover there at Samphire before we move on?
Yeah, I think I just want to touch on the engagement piece. Like Red said, the project's in a new area. We're quite close to a regional town of Whyalla, 20 kilometres south. So we've been working very hard with the local community, the local councils. We've done a lot of engagement work, drop-in centres, drop-in sessions, newsletters and the like. And over the last 2 years, we've gauged from the community that there's a very, very good support for the project. We rarely have any negative sentiment coming our way. The project's very well supported. So we'll continue that work, keep up the momentum on that, particularly going into the mine lease application, which I'll shortly start to put my mind towards and get that happening, because that's also a federal approval that we need to go through first. So we'll start that engagement with the federal government on mining lease approvals. We've engaged a dedicated stakeholder manager who's doing very well, organising Greg and I to get out there in the community when we need to at a good cadence and pace. So we'll keep that up and keep that support for the project going forward.
That's good to add, and certainly community engagement's important. And out there too, it's pretty remote out there in the bush, even though it's not that far away from Adelaide. But it's certainly an area that economic drivers such as mining like this, in situ recovery mining, definitely a fantastic opportunity for the community to get on board with. Greg, the company confirmed back in August and October of 2024 a uranium discovery at the Big Lake Exploration Project in South Australia. Now, this is well north of Beverly 4 Mile Mine, just for general vicinity for our members to understand when looking at South Australia there. You guys now are doing some follow-up drilling. That's underway. Cover those past results, and then also any updates to current drilling, and of course the overall potential at Big Lake for another ISR-style deposit.
Yeah, so we're very pleased to have this as a new discovery. We started work on it with two external geologists rather started work on the concept probably 4 or 5 years ago, and basing it on it's an oil. It overlies, these sediments overlie a deep oil and gas basin, and a lot of the oil and gas wells did have gamma spikes in the sediments up the top when they were let the instruments run through the sediments. A lot of this was just narrow bands of clays where uranium had accumulated, but no one had ever tested the hydrogeology and looking for channels or tabular type sand flows. Is there the potential? They are the same formations, the Namba and Air formation, Namba at the top, Air underneath, which host the Beverly 4 Mile complex as well as Honeymoon. So these sediments have proven in the past in different parts of South Australia that they can host uranium mineralisation. So we acquired the initial tenement. We then picked up mineral rights around it because it's already oil and gas rights there, and started doing work looking at historical seismic data that was around to try to determine where there'd be targets and potential channels. Identified up to 12 targets. I think we drilled 6, and this was the 6th one. And we hit 20 to 30 metre of sands with 100 to 140 ppm uranium. Now, the beauty of this, it was air core drilling. Air core tends to smear results. It's very hard to define layers. But based on that discovery, we've now gone back there and we're starting up drilling in the last couple of weeks. We're just getting the rotary mud rigs sorted to stabilise, open the holes, put down spectral gamma tools, density tools, really start to determine what do we have in the sands. Different layers, multi-layers. Is it low grade? Are the areas are high grade? We're going to step out from the original discovery. We've got a cleared area. We've got a great relationship with the Indigenous group there. So, yeah, we're on the ground doing the work, and over the coming 2 to 3 months, we'll look at and report results that we get out of there. Now, our hope is, this is a very extensive area. We've got about a third of the mineral rights. We're talking to another company that has the mineral rights for lithium that they've been looking at. And we hope this is a brand new field, ISR field. And if we can make multiple discoveries there, that's a magnificent outcome for our shareholders. Now, it's very early stage. Both Andrea and I know where there's lots of places that have low-grade uranium and not necessarily economic. So we hope that this can turn into something that's economic. Andrea, do you want to enlarge really on what we're finding in terms of the mineralisation and the sands?
Yeah, so we testing part of the upper basin within about 150 metres of the surface, and so we've found uranium there. And based on our thinking of the mineralisation model that's in our minds when we're drilling, we're also testing now sands below that down to about 250 metres. And that's why we're bringing in the rotary mud rig so we can push deeper, because if there's uranium in the system, which we've proven in this recent drill program last year, we've got the host there, we've got uranium in the system, and so we're inquisitive to see what's a little bit deeper. So that's what we're doing in this program that we're on ground at the moment.
It's only a brief program. We're not going to spend a lot of cash on this year, but we want to advance. We want to get better quality data from the holes. We want to get better quality chip samples. We want to get better quality sand samples so that we can start to look at what we've got. So it's early stage, but we're very, very keen to move it forward at the right pace.
Yeah, and we know that we've hit roll fronts, and so it goes back to my earlier comment. Once you hit a roll front, you start following the lead, and so we've got the lead. This program's giving us the information now that we can interpret and start drilling out further and understanding what we've got there.
Andrea, I want to just follow up on this. You guys have a lot of grounds there. That's quite a big package. As far as the area, you and Greg know this region far better than I do, but as you guys said, there's not a lot of uranium exploration activity out in that area. It definitely is ISR amenable. What do you think the expectation is? I mean, obviously there is a plan to have a pipeline at Alligator Energy, but give us an idea of what you think the potential is out there. Is there a comparable?
Look, in my career, being an early explorationist, to step out into a tenement like we have, we knew we had the host rocks, but to step out and in the first drill program hit anomalous uranium to that level, normally you would get maybe 30 ppm or 50 ppm, but we were getting, one of our highest intersections was around 350 ppm. So that's very indicative of uranium flowing through the sands and the groundwater. So now that will happen in certain areas, and so our next job is to understand where that's likely to be. So that then starts to invoke our hydrogeologists and the thinking of where to drill. And so we'll start looking at rationalising the tenements in terms of its area and perhaps start focusing on certain spots of our tenure. But we're doing that work right now. So, we'll start zoning in on the most prospective parts of that tenement package. If we hadn't had the discovery, that job would be doubly hard.
Yeah. I think in terms of the future potential, it's a long time since there was a discovery of a new ISR field in South Australia. Samphire was the last one in 2007. And it really took Uranium SA from 2007 through to 2010, 3 years, to try to identify what do they really think they've got. So we're going to need this 2 to 3 year period to really bed down and say, okay, what do we think we have? Are we in channels? Are we in sand flows? What are we looking at here? And for example, the direction of potential water flows we don't even know yet. So there's certainly a lot to learn. So it's going to take that 2 to 3 years. We're getting a lot of interest from external parties in that, but at the moment we're carrying it ourselves, but let's see what happens in the future.
Greg, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Andrea, thanks for the comments on that, and hopefully you guys continue to progress the work. Secondary, of course, to Samphire here over there at Big Lake. Greg, any plans on Alligator Rivers exploration grounds in, of course, Northern Territories? Anything there you want to mention for 2025?
Look, we've done 3 years of solid work on the Narberlek North package of tenements, 11 tenement group, and this is a great area because it's got none of the overlying sandstone. We're straight into the potential for host rocks. Even though there's big weathering profiles, we can get in there. We're now getting an understanding of the geology. We've done 3 years of work. The pace and tempo of work there, it's a more expensive area to explore. You only have a dry season that extends from really May through to October. You've got to gear up, you do Indigenous meetings, get on the ground, do the work, then you've got to recover the work, rehab the ground, get off, and you're planning the next stage before you've got time to really analyse. So we've done 3 years, we've got great data, we've got historical data of all of our areas there. So we're doing a year of pulling that data together to really, really understand. We know we've got good targets for high-grade uranium there. We've intersected some high-grade uranium, and we found even last year we'll have some results come out shortly, a new area that we're interested in. But we need to pull back for a year for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's expensive exploration. Let's make sure we've got the cash we need to advance Samphire. So we're going to pull back on Arnhem Land. We're still going to keep the technical work ticking over there so that we've got targets ready to go in the future, but we won't spend a lot of dollars.
And of course, further pipeline for the company here as things continue down the pathway. Obviously, production is first and foremost, and then you have a little bit more optionality in terms of what you can do with that exploration funding. So appreciate that. Plus a good market, of course, as well. Other stuff, Greg, capital structure. Wanted to get a quick update on that just for some of the investors out there who want to hear about this. Cover off where we are with current cash on hand and how far down the development road that gets us here in 2025, the shares outstanding, and then, of course, major shareholders on the roster, including yourself and management.
I'll start with the shares. We're very wide open. As many of our listeners who know Australian companies, we started life in 2010. Went right through the doldrum years. We're issuing new shares to raise small quantities of cash to make sure we could keep exploring and keep the assets. We acquired Samphire in 2020 when we had a market cap of 6 million, and we paid about 3.5 to 4 million for it in shares. Since then, we've capital raised, initial raising in 2020, I think, or 21, and then a larger raising of 30 million in late 21, another raising of 30 million in late 23. And we start this year still with 20 million cash, of us 20 million Australian cash in the kitty. What that means, we've got a very large number of shares at a small share price, and that's typical for Australian explorers. But look, it does give us a lot of liquidity. We've had a lot of funds out of Southeast Asia and Australia, and we had at one stage 20% shareholding out of New York private equity, and they can come in and out of us while we discover and explore. So that's a good advantage. In terms of cash, the good thing about, we've done lots of work. We've already drilled out the Blackbush resource, and we have a solid resource. We'll have an update to that coming out in the coming month or two. We've prefabricated the pilot plant. That was a $3 million build. That's already done. So we've expended all that work already, and we still have 20 million cash to start the year. The construction cost of the plant is in the order of 3 million. The operational costs to run it over that 3 to 5 months that we planned is about 3 million. We've only got a very small spend on Big Lake Uranium. So we can advance our projects this year. But as some of your listeners will know, we surprised the market when we came out for a capital raise in late 23. We already had a lot of cash. We got some more. We have a philosophy that we start planning our next injection of capital when we've completed the last one. So we've been looking to see what we might need to do over probably from 12 months ago and going forward to make sure we're ready. So as a developer now, we never want to be short of cash. And so we've been cautious with our spend, but making sure we're focusing on the Samphire project through this year. We really only have around 3 to 4% management holding. That's fairly typical of Australian companies which have been on the market for a long time, and we've had to bring in external cash. I myself have just under 1% of the company, which has been accumulated. In fact, a lot of it has been accumulated by taking shares instead of cash when we were low on cash in leading up to 21. We're still very dedicated to the group. It's a significant part of what we do in our lives, as you are well aware. Our largest shareholder is, in fact, one of the uranium funds, so one of the ETFs. We don't have any other large shareholders, so we're quite wide open. And that's a big advantage when we have investors having a look at us, by the way. They really see there's no constraints on getting involved in the company. So we like that.
Despite what some people would think about the share structure of the company, market caps are market caps and value delivery is value delivery. And this company has, over the years that we've, of course, followed it and been involved, this company has delivered market cap growth and has delivered value over the years as you guys progress on this pathway. So a long ways from the early days of a very small market cap company. Andrea, Greg, anything else you guys want to add as far as talking points before we wrap it up?
I'd like to add a couple of things. First of all, we have made an investment into ISR copper. Now, in a way, as a board, we started to look at other mineral associations that might augment uranium, and particularly before the uranium price started to take off. So we had some nickel, gold, cobalt in northern Italy, and we still have that. That's on our books, but we're sourcing interested parties to take that from us, either JV or acquire. So we're cleaning that up. But we did have the opportunity to look at a private company with uranium ISR experienced guys in it who have done research work over 6 years of fractured rock aquifers for copper, in oxide copper. Now, South Australia is full of oxide copper. There's so much oxide copper in South Australia above the known copper deposits. And the good thing about the technology they've been doing is essentially being able to map and model those fractured rock aquifers, the hydrogeological flow. In fact, one of our hydrogeologists was involved in their work. So we've been impressed with what they've done, and they've put a small amount of money in themselves. They then got government grants to progress it. Now BHP is funding the first trial, the ring trial, which is about to commence once they get their plan approved. We've put in enough money to get 15% of the company. I'm now sitting on the board, and we like this because they have done a lot of research work and looking at what ISR copper has been done in the States in Arizona and mapping the area of South Australia. We have a fully experienced ISR production team in our place under Andrea. So it's a good augment. It's not taking our technical people's time. Andrea sits on the technical committee, I sit on the board. But we think it's a very interesting adjunct for the future, and we're keen to see that progress. We do know there are now other parties interested in having a look at this company as well. So that's just a side issue, but it's very good value for shareholders, I think, for future of copper, which we all know is going to grow.
Andrea, anything else you wanted to add?
Oh, look, I think I've provided a lot of detail today, but like I said, we're now going headfirst into scoping for the mining lease approvals and really kicking off that federal discussion and the EPBC approvals, what it's termed, and get that going. So that's the focus for the team in the next few months, plus the field recovery trial, obviously, and successfully completing that and gathering the data we need to move into feasibility.
That's great. Andrea, thank you for the extra details and also your comments today on that. It's been extra helpful to have you on here with Greg talking about the different activities, and definitely going to have your plate full. Greg, thank you for touching on the copper ISR bid. And of course, as you know, we're closely following Taseko Mines in Florence, ISR Copper there in Arizona, and seeing how this is going to commission up, and some of the uranium expertise that's over there helping them out as well. So appreciate the thoughts on that, plus your guys' investment there, and looking forward to seeing how that progresses in the years ahead here. Well, thanks to you both for the update and the time today. Greg, I'll leave you with this one to touch on, and Andrea to follow up on if she would like to. For potential investors who are listening in, Alligator Energy has a market capitalization of about 120 million Australian dollars. Why should the company be considered within the institutional, family office, and retail investors' portfolio at this stage?
Okay, so we are a company which has a developing in situ uranium project in South Australia, one of the key jurisdictions globally where there's been 40 years continuous uranium mining. We are well known to nuclear utilities. We have an ISR project which is expandable. We know it's going to be economic. We just need to take it forward through the approval processes. Between Andrea and I, we've gone through 6 uranium mine approvals in Australia. We know the game pretty well, and she's got a fantastic team under her experience which can take this forward. So we are intending to be South Australia's next ISR uranium mine.
Thank you for that, Greg. And what is the best way for folks to reach out to the company?
Well, we have an info email address, and that gets, even if the office not manned, that gets recorded, and I see them every morning that anyone who wants to email comes in. We have a landline for the company, that a small office in Brisbane, which is where the Chief Financial Officer and accountants sit. That's open during business hours. But the email address is great because I personally try to respond to every shareholder or investor inquiry, and Andrea helps me do that as well. So we will come back via email, or I'd rather actually have a phone call with someone, and once they email, I'll try to make contact with them.
Andrea, Greg, keep up the work to advance Samphire and, of course, Alligator Energy. Really appreciate it. Look forward to hearing from you again later in the year.
Thanks, Andrew. It was great to be on today. Best wishes.
All the best, Andrew. Thanks for your time, mate.